Hello and welcome. My name is Meepless, they, he, she, and today's pick is Transitions, A Mother's Journey by Elodie Durand and translated by Anne McGorray. Originally published in French in 2021, it was translated and published in English by Top Shelf Productions in 2023. Content notes for transphobia, dead naming, diagrams of genitalia, suicide, and nudity. But before I launch into the rest of the review, I will admit that I picked up this book 75% for professional-ish reasons, whatever making these reviews counts as, and 25% for personal interest reasons. Perhaps I'm overthinking things a bit, but I did go back and forth a couple of times about how I felt about a book centering the story of a parent of a trans person. At this precise point in time, writing this review for this specific book, I am only talking about it because I have reached a certain piece about it, which basically boils down to it's better for a parent to outline their journey to acceptance and advocating for trans rights over forcing trans people to address the common fear tactics of transphobes. This doesn't mean that trans people can't address these, if we're being honest, pretty flimsy arguments, but the fewer people writing about a topic, the more pressure seems to be exerted on them to make it all-encompassing and as simple as possible. Even as transphobia is on a frightening rise in my area and in many far-flung places around the world, English stories by and about, in a positive way, trans people are also on the rise. Access to them is not always easy, but awareness that they exist is higher than before. So I think Transitions is a part of the diversity of stories that currently exist in the English reading world. I still think that centering the stories of trans people themselves is the most important thing to prioritize. This book is aiming straight at not accepting parents. If you are a trans person, I would lean towards recommending you don't read this. Take care of yourself and maybe read almost any other title on my queer comics list. Now we can proceed. Keywords that came to mind: family, gender, assumptions, history, expressive, and pink. The summary is, quote, when Anne learns that her 19-year-old is a transgender man, she struggles to understand her son's new identity. A new landmark in nonfiction comics, Transitions is a sympathetic, informative, and moving story of a family's journey to acceptance. I thought I was open-minded. The news of my child's transition hit me like a tidal wave, sweeping away all my preconceived notions, sweeping away the comfort of my tidy little life. When university biologist Anne Marbot learns that the 19-year-old she raised as Lucie is a transgender man named Alex, she's overwhelmed by questions. How can this be? Who put these ideas in your head? What if you regret it? Am I overreacting? How will your grandparents react? Why didn't I see it coming? Why is this so easy for others? Am I a bigot? What does gender really mean anyway? How can I be the parent my child needs? It soon becomes clear that Alex is not the only one embarking on a journey of self-discovery. The road is not easy, and sometimes their relationship is bitterly strained. But Alex is sure of himself, and Anne is determined to be strong for his sake. With time, she too will be transformed, rediscovering her identity as a mother in profound new ways. With grace and sensitivity, award-winning graphic novelist Elodie Durand captures the unique journey of well-meaning loved ones who struggle to reconcile new gender identities with their old assumptions. Deeply reached and drawn from true experience, Transitions is a must-read companion for the allies and families navigating trans issues and a compassionate roadmap to acceptance. End quote. Again, I do think must-read is an egregious publishing copy exaggeration, but they do at least correctly identify their audience and correctly gender the trans son in question. But circling back to the reasons that I picked this book up, the 25% personal reasons was actually because the book was written and illustrated by Elodie Durand, who also wrote my 5-star read from last year, parentheses, a graphic memoir about Durand's experience with tumor-related epilepsy. Check out my review to learn more about them. But knowing this, it was very unsurprising that of all aspects of this graphic novel, the art and page layouts were super impressive. No matter if it's line, frame, color, or pacing, Durand wields each tool at her disposal with incredible skill, communicating in a clear and concise way not only the literal storyline, but also the whirlwind of emotions being expressed by her subject. A+. Moving on to the subject. Anne is a university biologist and mother of 3. According to Durand's opening note, this book is in large part based off of a real person with the caveat that, quote, between fiction and reality, the line is blurred. I would have appreciated a bit more transparency, as a story like this is highly dependent on its genuineness, but I did appreciate that it stuck strictly to the mother's perspective and didn't try to pretend to be anything different. And despite the blurry lines, Durand does specifically note that the letters were in fact by the person who Alex, the Durand son, is based on, which is the notable time we leave the mother's perspective. Another strength of this book, although it certainly doesn't make the book any easier to read for people who have had to put up with this crap, is that I felt like the book deliberately highlights that Anne, in dead naming and being generally unaffirming of her son at first, is not only an asshole, but also wrong, with 99% of other family members being immediately affirming, including the before-mentioned grandparents and also Anne's current husband, among others, and often telling Anne outright she is wrong. She is also revealed to be pretty naive when it comes to her idea that trans people are safe and respected generally by the medical system. Plus, as we already noted, the blurb similarly does not seem confused at all about how to address Alex. Jumping off from there, we also see Anne go through a pretty distinct character arc, not only following her from an unaffirming position to a neutral live and let live position, but moving beyond to internalizing what she's learned and educating her university peers on how so many of our current norms are ill-informed. And in turn, Elodie shares these insights with the reader in a very interesting and informative way, wrapping things up with a suggested further reading list, which is something I always appreciate. But yeah, that's why I do feel like it serves its target audience pretty well. Something included that I think could have been outlined a bit more overtly is that gender and transitioning is something that Alex has been thinking about a lot longer than Anne realized, as it's fairly common for transphobic parents to claim that wanting to transition is a contagion that suddenly attacked their child, and does spend some time thinking about all the assumptions she had been bringing to the table, thinking about Alex growing up, but sometimes you can't be too obvious. Some dialogue that really stuck with me was when Anne was meeting with Alex's therapist, who told her, quote, "Do you understand the trust that your child puts in you when they share their plan? You matter a lot to them. I agreed to meet with you at the behest of Alex. This meeting together is like a call for help and support from you. This is not a voluntary choice, but rather a need for identity, which takes a great amount of courage," end quote. Which I did think gave me some language that I didn't have before about the dynamic of sharing one's gender identity with parents. Looking at the intersections and identities that I always check in for these things, gender is obviously pretty front and central, as we've already discussed. Both that of someone else's transition journey, but also the ways our subject must reevaluate her own cis womanhood. Race was not part of the narrative, but was included in some of the asides that tried to illustrate a world beyond the Western binary. Ability/disability was not touched on in any meaningful way, with some very brief asides to how transitioning to different degrees can impact a person's fertility, a field still in need of tons of research, particularly when people aren't being forced to undergo unwanted surgeries in order to get their gender markers changed. From my vantage point, I hear about trans people having kids all the time. So there's some bits and pieces highlighted that are particular to France, but place didn't feel like a very strong character. Class was the most glossed over and ignored. Wrapping things up, overall, I would say the book is good, so 3 stars, with the caveat that I do think that all the negative reviews I saw on Goodreads at this point also had valid points. And the book only works in a narrow band of representation and for a very specific audience. We still need more trans stories by trans people pushing the narrative as far beyond the basic/introductory topics as possible. Bye y'all, keep reading and stand with striking workers. And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.